Hey everyone, we're back with another deck tech. This time featuring Yoshimaru, Ever Faithful, and Reyhan, Last the Abzan. Yoshimaru is a bigger threat in this deck, but Reyhan acts as a nice support for all your +1/+1 counter synergies. We're maximizing on our legendary permanents in this deck to make sure that Yoshimaru can get as big as possible and hit like a truck. And on top of that, we've got a combo finish. Yoshimaru costs a single white, and he's a 1/1 that gets bigger every time you play a legendary permanent, which this deck is completely full of. So oftentimes by turn 4 or 5, this is a 7/7 for 1 mana, and even if it dies, you can get it back very cheaply. And if he dies, you can take all the counters that were on him and move them around with Reyhan. As we mentioned earlier, Reyhan is kind of the support. It's only a 3/3 for 3, but those are all counters. So if she dies, you can put those counters on Yoshimaru or another creature, and also lets us save whatever counters you've accumulated. But most importantly, it gives us access to a second commander in black and green, my favorite colors. Our premier one-drop play is always going to be Yoshimaru, and our mana base reflects this with a lot of white sources. The best follow-up is a Mox Amber. It's a legendary permanent that lets you ramp. And then we also have the Lighted Halfling as an option, which can ramp you into a 3-drop, maybe Reyhan on turn 2 instead of Yoshimaru. Outside of that, all of our ramp costs 2 because we want to be playing our commander turn 1. So we have Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, and Farseek for obvious reasons. Next, we have our Duel of Nylea. This pumps attacking creatures with +1/+1 counters, and if it's put on either of our commanders, it'll probably pop in a single attack. Separately, if you sacrifice the creatures attached to it and it just falls off because you sacrificed the enchantment, you still get that ramp. Next, we have Sword of the Animist. It's a classic ramp card. It's also legendary. Lastly, we have Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. This is a very high-powered deck with low CMC, which will probably face other high-powered decks with low CMC. So double spelling will happen early and will happen often, meaning you get a lot of treasures as the game goes on, which is especially helpful in a 3-color deck. Our last ramp effect helps us punch through damage. Kodama the West Tree is 2 and a green for a 3/3 with reach. It's also legendary. And modified creatures you control have trample. This will mean both your commanders can get through and punch, and when they do hit, they'll get you a basic land card from your deck into play tapped. That's about it for ramp. You'll notice this deck is skipping Soul Ring. We really want to play Yoshi on turn 1 and just get right out there and start attacking. We're skipping a lot of the setup because our threats are again so low costed. Not for nothing, Soul Ring also deserves a ban. Stop lying to yourself. Now let's get into cheap protection for our goodest boy. We've got Scrub, the Factor of Might. It's 1 white for 1/1. It's got Toxic, can't block. That doesn't matter. Phyrexian White and Tappy, you can choose a color. You can give a creature, in this case Yoshimaru, hexproof from that color and Toxic 1 it's on a turn, and it can't be blocked by creatures of that color. This helps push through damage and protect Yoshimaru in a pinch. Next we have Revitalizing Repast. It's Golgari Hybrid for a 1 mana spell that puts a 1/1 counter on target creature and gives it indestructible. It's also a black-green dual land when you need it. Lastly, Snakeskin Veil gives hexproof and a 1/1 counter. When possible, use the hexproof for target removal, even if it says destroy, and use the indestructible for board wipes. Next, we have 2 more creatures. Shalai, Voice of Plenty, 3 and a white for a legendary creature angel with flying. It's a 3/4. It gives you planeswalkers you control and each other creature hexproof, not counting itself. Lastly, it's got a mana sink for 6 and 2 green. It's not amazing, but it's just extra value to have if you have the mana. These kind of things just vastly improve the quality of your deck because even if you draw really terribly and just only hit lands, you can still do something with your turn. After that, we have Boromir, Warden of the Tower. It's 2 and a white for a 3/3 of Vigilance. It also counters any free spell your opponent's cast, which is super nice for those free commander spells. And then separately, you can sacrifice it to give creatures you control indestructible, all of them, and the ring tempts you. In addition to being a very aggressive deck, this deck can also grind. So running 6 for 2 and a green, it's a 2/4 with reach. Whenever it attacks, you mill 3. You can put a land card from among them to your hand. And then non-land permanents you ever have a trace, you can discard that land you just got. In addition, you can play the land, which is often legendary to get a 1/1 counter on Yoshi, but we're mostly using this to get extra value out of our graveyard. After that, we've got Unearth. We're in black, and we've got 2 commanders as hits, so we're of course going to be running Unearth. Lastly is Chthonian Nightmare. It's a permanent, so it synergizes with 6. It gives you 3 energy on ETB, and you can pay X energy and sacrifice it as well as another creature to get back a creature card from your graveyard with mana cost with the amount of energy spent. In this case, Yoshi only costs 1, Reyhan costs 3, you can get them both back. And if you get Yoshi back, you can accrue more energy for the next time you use Chthonian Nightmare, which does again come back and make a nightmare for our opponents. For the next section, we're going to have the direct counter synergies. First, we have Lizel, Vlaaka's Champion. She's a 2 and a white 3/3 that effectively gives you the Hardened Scales effect on a body, and on top of that, it counts for Planeswalkers as well. We're only running 1, but you could easily run Grist or a Veraska on this list as well. This generally just helps us pump Yoshi even faster. When she comes down, she pumps him by +2, and then makes every additional one another +2 counter. Next is Ozla's Shattered Spire. It's 1 green, it's a legendary artifact. So it again will pump Yoshi when it comes down by 2. If 1 or more 1 counters we put on an artifact or creature control, that many +1 are probably instead. So on top of being a Hardened Scales effect, this also lets you manually put counters on creatures, which would cause 2 mana for 2 counters, not a bad rate, and you can cycle it if it's dead in the late game. Our next card is a house, but she's also a mom, Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. Legendary creature for X-Men prior, it's a 4/7 vigilance, which is a huge body. It doubles our ETB triggers, including Yoshimaru Seeing Legends. And then on top of that, it stops our opponents, which they will not be super happy about. Much more tame, we have Kelith Summoning Familiar. It's a 1 white for 1/1. Whenever a commander you control attacks, put one counter on it. It's also legendary. So it comes in and gives Yoshi a counter. He attacks, gets another counter, and triggers for both Yoshi and Reyhan. Next, we have a legendary super efficient 2-drop. It's Grizzly Bill Spine Sower. 1 or green for a 2/2, has landfall. Whenever land enters, put 1 counter on target creature. This will make Yoshi even bigger than he already was going to be. Then for 3 and 2 green, you can double number 1 counters on each creature you control. We're also running Grakmaw Skyclave Ravager, 1 in Golgari for a 0/0, but enters with 3/1 counters on it, which can grow with any of your Heart and Scales effects. Whenever another creature you control dies, if you add 1/1 counter on it, put 1 counter on Grakmaw so it grows even more. And then when it dies, you make an XX Black Green Hydra, where X is number 1 counters on it, so it's going to be as big as Grakmaw was. We're running a bunch of sac effects in this deck, so if you have Reyhan out, you can move Grakmaw's counters somewhere else, and then you get the XX that was the size of Grakmaw. Newcomer to the deck from Assassin's Creed, we have Cleopatra Exiled Pharaoh, 2 Golgari for a 2/4 legendary creature, Human Noble. At the beginning of your end step, you put 2 on counters on each up to 2 carded creatures that are legendary, and then whenever legend you control dies, if it had a counter on it, you draw a card for each counter on it, and you lose 2 life. Notably, it's not 2 life per counter here, so you can draw like 10 cards from 1 creature dying and still only lose 2 life. This card will let us push through on cards in late game to just draw tons and then outpace our opponent. For more counter synergies, we have Anaphansa Kintry's Spirit and Heliod, the Sun Crowned. These are also part of the combo section, but they do have some +1/+1 counter synergies as well. I mentioned this deck can grind, so we're gonna get into the card draw section / like card advantage section of this deck. First off, we have Captain Sisse. It's 2 and Selesnya for a 2/2. Legendary creature, human soldier. The body's not very impressive, but what is impressive is you can tap it to tutor for legend and put it into your hand, then shuffle. Next, you have the One Ring. The Bane of Modern. It's 4 mana for legendary artifact, indestructible. You know what this card does? It's very busted. If your playgroup's not okay with this card, don't run it, but it's very good if you're playing in higher power. Casper Sentinel punishes your opponents for playing non-creature spells, and you can buff it to a pretty large size in this deck. Once it gets to 4 or more power, they're not paying that mana. Next, you have Toski, Bearer of Secrets. You're going to be attacking the opponents and hopefully punching through for damage, and then you can draw some cards as well. Next, we got Reki, the History of Kamigawa, 2 and a green for a 1/2 legendary creature. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, draw a card. This is a cast trigger, so even if your legends get countered, you still draw those cards. We have Kutzil, Malamet Exemplar, 1 in Selesnya for a 3/3 legendary creature, Cat Warrior. This one gives the Grand Abolisher effect, but on top of that, it has the Toski effect for creatures that have power greater than a base power, which is any of your creatures that are equipped, have a 1/1 counter on them, get buffed during combat, have some special text. This card is an uncommon bomb. It protects our combat tricks, it protects our combo, and on top of that, just draws us a ton of cards. Running another modern banned card in Lures of the Dream Den, it's 1 in 2 Orzhov Hybrid for a legendary creature, Cat Nightmare, 3/2, with lifelink, which is not nothing. But more importantly, during each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with CMC 2 or less from your graveyard. So if you sacrifice your commander, you sacrifice a small creature, or even a permanent like maybe Chthonian Nightmare. Luris provides that recurring valuing gas that'll make it very hard to keep your deck down. You will very rarely have that garbage time where you're the one at the table doing nothing. You will always have something to do with your mana, with your time, with your turns, and hopefully win the game from there. We've got the Great Henge as a all-around just counter synergy, life gain, card draw engine. We've got Glissa Sunslayer. She's 1 in Golgari for a 3/3 first strike death touch, so she's going to get through when she attacks, unless they want to sacrifice 3 creatures to block her, and then have something else on top of that to actually kill her. One of my favorite new cards for this deck is Vraska Joins Up. It's Golgari for a legendary enchantment. When it ETBs, put death touch counter on each creature you control, and whenever a legendary creature you control does combat damage to a player, draw a card. This synergizes both with Kodama to make sure they get trample and death touch, which is a great combo. And on top of that, Cleopatra, who will see death touch counters and 1/1 counters and give you even more card draw. Next, we have a combined Urza's Saga, Stoneforge Mystic kind of tutor toolbox package. Stoneforge is an amazing card. It draws you a equipment to your hand. We have Lion Sash that helps with graveyard stuff. Mask of Grizzlebrand is legendary, but also when the creature is equipped with dies, you can draw cards and lose X life or X's power, and it gives that creature flying and lifelink. This is great to stick on a massive Yoshimaru and just like sacrifice end of turn after attacking to draw a ton of cards. This is actually one of the cheapest cards in this deck, and just a fine budget included in pretty much any deck. People are sleeping on this card. If you haven't played it yet, run Mask Grizzlebrand. You'll be glad you did. And then for 1 mana, we have both Tarian Soul Cleaver and Shadow Spear. We're doing a lot of sacrifice, so Tarians will grow a creature. Shadow Spear also makes sure that Yoshimaru can punch through and helps for our removal. And then lastly, for 1 mana, we have the Ozolith legendary artifact that gives that Reyhan effect where we can move counters around. For generally good stuff, we have Invasion of Ikoria. It's X and 2 green. You can search for a non-human creature and put it onto the battlefield. And the backside is a legend that lets your non-human creatures assign combat damage so they're not blocked. Next, we have Sinu Kidai Protector. It's 1 and a white. For 2/1 Flying Vigilance, you can exile it to gain 2 life and scry 2 by tapping it, which you can only do after it's attacked because of Vigilance. And whenever a legendary creature you control attacks and isn't blocked, if it's exiled, you can put onto the battlefield attacking, including maybe a battle. Sinu will help you trigger Yoshimaru turn after turn, as well as gain you some life and scrying for that additional card selection value. Lastly, for the miscellaneous stuff, we have Dahlia Hereticathar. She's a 3/2 first striking legendary human soldier that slows your opponents down because their creatures are non-basic lands that are tapped. This will just help you set up your game plan faster than your opponents. We're in Abzan, so I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about removal. We have 2 commanders, so we're running Deadly Rollick, cards free and amazing. We have Path to Exile, so it's the Plowshares. Anguish I'm making for generically hitting almost anything. We're running Dam because when the Ors have colors and the card is amazing. We're not often behind on board, so you're not often overloading this, but you have the option to, which is super nice. Urza's Ruinous Blast is 4 and white for legendary sorcery. Exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. This will lead your board mostly unscathed. We're running the Wandering Emperor. This is Yoshimaru's owner, so it's flavorful, but also it's a fine card. Enters, gives Yoshi a counter, and you can remove a creature. Or you can put another counter on Yoshi and give it first strike, or make a 2/2 blocker out of nowhere. Meathook Massacre is almost a combo piece more as removal. It's X and black, and it shrinks each creature by X until end of turn. And whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. It's mostly there for the lose 1 life effect when your creatures die, and use combo with aristocratic pieces that are loops, and you win the game. Speaking of aristocratic loops, we're gonna need sack effects. We're running Carrion Feeder, Yeheni Undying Partisan, Bartolome del Presidio. These creatures, in addition to being sack effects, are also just creatures that grow with 1/1 counters and synergize their whole deck. And Greater Good is another sack effect that we can't use infinitely because we draw cards, but that's also kind of the upside. We have both Meathook, we mentioned earlier, and ELSO Core, Cystic Pilgrim, to drain our opponents. So now for the combo, we need 4 pieces. We need a sack effect, we need Kishin Finks, and we need a drain effect. And lastly, either Anaphansic Entry Spirit or Heliod Suncrown, which will both loop the Kitchen Finks infinitely. Heliod Suncrown also can combo with the Walking Ballista we have in the deck to, again, just do infinite damage with only 2 cards. Next, we're into lands. We can kind of make or break the budget. You could go even higher or definitely much lower with the legendary lands, but they will severely impact your budget. So this is a Field of Dead deck. We're running all 6 basics, including 3 regular, 3 snow, all of our shocks, 2 surveil lands in Lush Portico and Chevy Backstreet, and Indath the Triumph, as well as 2 fetches. Next, we have Bountiful Promenade, Vault of Champions, Undergrowth Stadium, as we should, Silent Clearing, and Horizon Canopy for the white base Horizon lands that will let us cast our commander but can be cashed in late game for a card. The only other MDFC we're running is Wish Enchanter, and we're also running Concealed Courtyard to make sure we can cast our commander on turn 1. Next, we're going to go into the legendary and just expensive lands you can omit to have a much better budget, but these cards do kind of maximize the deck by pumping Yoshimaru, and some have really cool effects for utility that you just kind of want to have. So first we have Flagstone Centric Care. This is just an untapped white legendary land. Black Gate, you probably want to spring for. It lets your Yoshimaru get in unblocked, and it's legendary and can come in untapped. Urborg again helps with fixing and is legendary, but definitely one of the ones to not spring for if you're going for a budget. Yavimaya, same deal. It's great for fixing, but it could just be a forest. Takanuma, Abandoned Mire, as well as Besaiju and Iganjo are ones you would want to get because they have an additional effect. The Shire, not necessary, not super expensive, but it just kind of makes a food token. But it's a legendary land that, again, pumps Yoshimaru. Okina, Temple of the Grandfathers, again, not one to spring for, just pumps the legend, comes in untapped. Shizo, you do want tap to add black to your mana pool, but target legendary creature gains fear until end of turn, means Yoshimaru can get through unblocked. Minas Tirith's not as expensive, and it produces white and comes in untapped possibly, so you kind of want this one. Field of Dead makes you zombies to sacrifice for value, or just block with. Definitely worth in a higher budget deck. Giganjo Castle is an untapped white source that prevents damage to legendaries, but again, not needed to spring for. And lastly, Urza Saga helps with the tutor package, but you can remove that package. This is actually my most expensive personal deck, but it's super fun to play, and it has access to 2 commanders. You draw a ton of cards. Your cards are aggressive, you have a combo finish. It does so much with the cards that it has, and it always feels like you're in the game no matter what happens. You can definitely customize this deck to be as high or low budget as you want. I personally don't run Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, but it would probably be a great fit for this deck as well. There are plenty of cool legends out there, and this deck will maximize all of them because you're pumping your commander and getting in with a big borking boy. That wraps up my Yoshi Reyhan deck tech. I hope you like this content. You can let me know by liking and subscribing on YouTube to Commander Wendy's or S Freezy. Let me know if there's a deck you want me to build, and I'll do a deep dive and video on in the comments. And lastly, it's cold out there, so remember to stay frosty, my friends.